Well, hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to M4L Academy. My name is Missy Karwowski, Director of M4LA, and I am so glad that you've joined us today. Today's conversation is the first of some really unique content that we're excited to bring you in August as we prepare for the school year ahead, which is just around the corner, and frankly, for some of you, it might have already started. So these are Campus Briefings IRL. Stories from real life people who have experienced what we discussed with our campus briefing experts and how the experience looked in real life. We'll feature Moms for Liberty members and leaders from around the country who will share their experience and offer tips, guidance, and direction for how you can fight back too. Yesterday, Daniel Buck spoke about the warning signs and red flags to look for in today's classrooms and curriculum. He walked us through what to question and why, and pointed out how trends in education have shifted dramatically over the years, and that the content being presented to our kids today is really not the same content that many of us experienced growing up. I know I personally have seen that, and I imagine you probably have as well. In today's Campus Briefing IRL, we continue to explore concerning curriculum and how two fearless, joyful warriors dealt with it in their school districts. We'll hear each of their stories. You'll get to see just why the curriculum was so concerning, and then we'll dive into Q&A to really unpack the experience. Our first guest is Denise Bell. Denise Bell is a dedicated education advocate and champion for parental rights coming to us from the great state of Texas. She is the chapter chair of Moms for Liberty Harris County and also serves as an executive board member for Moms for Liberty Texas Legislative Committee, where she works to strengthen parent voices in education policy. She also serves on the Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids Committee for the Republican Party of Texas. And of course, with all of her free time, Denise is also active with Pipeline, a parent-led grassroots group focused on improving public education in Spring Branch ISD, and has held various leadership roles in PTAs, faith-based ministries, and community service organizations. And she is passionate about raising awareness of the dangers of Marxism and globalist propaganda in public education as she continues the fight to empower parents and defending parental rights to direct their children's education. Wow, Denise, you are truly a joyful warrior and you are just rocking it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, you have a really incredible story. I know when we were talking about it before, I was just floored at some of the things that you shared. So I'm genuinely excited for you to be able to share this today. I think one of the biggest things that happens, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is we talk to friends, family, whoever, and other parents, and they say, well, okay, that's terrible, but I'm sure it's not happening here. It's not happening in my school district. But it is. It's happening everywhere. So I just want to dive right into it, and you can share your story about what you saw with curriculum.
Absolutely. So I'm a mom of four, and unfortunately, we've experienced a number of curriculum issues with our children. And I'm going to go through three of those today, two of which my own children's classes. I'm going to go through an AP US history course. I'm going to go through an elementary social studies class that was teaching communism versus capitalism. And I'm also going to go through some supplemental curriculum that was found this year in our high school.
All right. Well, I think we have a couple of those slides too,
yes,
to be able to share. Okay,
yes.
Great.
So I'll just dive in. The first one was a class, an AP US history class that my oldest daughter had a few years ago. And unfortunately, I didn't find this curriculum until after she completed the course. And another parent had sent me a picture of just a little snippet of this curriculum. And when I saw it, I was just absolutely floored by what was being presented to the kids. This was just a little snippet on Columbus, the explorer, Christopher Columbus. And what it said was all negative about Christopher Columbus. And so that propelled me to question everything in the curriculum. And I was very fortunate to obtain a copy of this curriculum. And what it wasn't a textbook. It wasn't an online resource. The teacher had put together her own packet, 100 or so pages, and it was spiral bound and given out to each student. And most of their lessons came from that document, is my understanding. So I was able to obtain a copy of this curriculum, and I just went through it. I read the whole thing. And what I want to say is I am not a historian. I'm just a mom. But even being just a mom, I was able to pick out 20 or so issues with this curriculum that were problematic. Mainly it was bias and actually inaccurate or not even factual statements that were made in the class, which is really unbelievable given that this is a high caliber course. It's an AP US history course. So it's supposed to be an advanced course, and it was teaching inaccurate information. And I think on the next, I think it's the next slide that kind of goes through some of the high level, what was there in the curriculum. This isn't everything that I found. It's just a few things. I mentioned Christopher Columbus. All the explorers were portrayed negatively. George Washington was barely mentioned, and what was mentioned about him was very weak. He sounded kind of like a fop, is how I would describe it. There was left-leaning bias throughout the curriculum, including critical race theory components. Capitalism was portrayed negatively, and socialism was portrayed positively, and other inaccuracies, as you can see. So if we go to the next slide, this is what kind of set everything in motion for me when I received this picture. And again, my daughter had finished this class, but because I was so upset, I had to say something, even though she had already been through this class. Plus, I have 3 other children that were going to be attending the same school in the future. And I couldn't stand to let this just be there. I mean, something had to be said. This is wrong. So all the things that were taught about Columbus, as I mentioned, were negative. But I want to draw your attention to the last sentence, and I don't know if the viewers can actually see it. But basically, there was an audacious claim that was made that Columbus was instructing his men to, when they would exploit, they use the word exploit, the natives, they would actually, when they killed them, the men and the dogs were fed the remains of the natives. And that is an unsubstantiated claim. There is no historical basis for that. It is just wild to me that that was taught. And the thing, while Columbus is a complicated figure in history, all figures in history have to be judged during the context or from the time period that they lived in. They're not to be judged by standards. They didn't have today's knowledge or culture or, values. They lived in a different time. And so I really feel like this is a very unfair portrayal of Columbus. And I don't want any kind of bias in history. I just want my children to be taught accurate history. I want them to learn the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, because only when we have true, accurate history can we build a solid foundation. You cannot build on lies. And these are lies. This is unsubstantiated information. On the next slide, I'm going to take you through. This was another chart in the class, and this really upset me greatly because part of my heritage comes, my grandparents and their relatives were under the Iron Curtain. So I was very offended by this chart, but this was a chart that was given to the students in the curriculum. And right before they gave the kids the chart, it has this statement: most groups labeled as communists were actually part of the Socialist Party. They officially split in 1919. Many capitalists called socialists communists to incite fear and portray radicalism. And some were radical, but most were moderate, is what it says. So it kind of gives you this disclaimer at the beginning. And we know that socialism and communism are both forms of Marxism. They're very, very similar. And all communist countries are socialist. Maybe not all socialist countries are communist, but they're all Marxist in theory. And so, but they're making a distinction here: communism, socialism, capitalism. And what ends up happening after you read this chart is that capitalism looks like the winner. And again, this was presented to APUS history students.
Wait, you said capitalism looks like the
winner? I'm sorry. Socialism looks like the winner in this chart.
Yeah.
And, again, these are juniors in high school mostly that are taking this class. And so if I can just draw your attention to 2 of the things on this chart, it talks about classes and the treatment of poor and needy. And I'm just going to tell you what it says under socialism versus capitalism. Under classes, in theory, it teaches the kids that socialism is egalitarian. But in the real world, kids, the classes are mixed with a large middle class. Okay. Then under capitalism, under theory, it says strict stratification with mobility. But in the real world, kids, in how it is in practice, is a capitalism is strict with limited mobility. That is a flat out lie. People come to this country and they can become anything they want to be. They can better themselves, they can work hard, and they can get somewhere in life that they want to be. That is not true. Then the next one is treatment of the poor and needy. In theory, under socialism, it's good, gets rid of poverty. That's the theory. But in the real world, public works help poor and create the middle class. That's what the chart says. Under capitalism, it says in theory, public works help poor and create the middle class, which is what they're saying socialism really does. And then in the real world, kids, here it is, the poor are usually exploited with help from some. And that word exploited is throughout the curriculum. And that is just insulting. The United States and the American people are some of the most generous people in the entire world. We give. I mean, our tax money goes all over the world, as we know. But just, individuals are constantly giving in our country. So this is really quite offensive. But this is the seed that they're planting, that socialism is actually what helps people and is not exploitative. The next thing that I found was a racial bias throughout the curriculum. And one of the things that is very intentional, and this may seem like a simple thing, but it's very intentional, is the capitalization of Black versus white. And that was, again, throughout. And that is something that comes from critical race theory. And it's kind of in teaching that Blacks are an ethnic group, whereas whites are not considered that. We have different nationalities, different ethnicities. You can maybe make the argument for that, I guess. But the other thing is that white, they are saying the decision to have a lowercase white is because white people do not have a shared history of systemic oppression based on skin color. And if you were to have white capitalized, it could signal white supremacy. So that's kind of where it's coming from a critical race theory standpoint. Another issue that I found in the curriculum can be found on the next slide. And it's the portrayal of the Republican Party. And what it says in here is basically that Republican Party did end slavery, but it has a disclaimer after that please note, it says, note that the names Democrat and Republican are the names still used today by these parties. However, their values have shifted as times change. There has to be like a little dig in there, a little disclaimer. One of the next issues that I found is Margaret Sanger. Remember, I think I mentioned that George Washington was barely mentioned in this curriculum. Margaret Sanger has a nice long paragraph, and it's pretty glowing review of Margaret Sanger. It kind of portrays her as just, a feminist woman that was helping with birth. She was trying to promote birth control and options for women, but it was just a very glowing portrayal of her in comparison to the very little information that was given to students on George Washington, and a very tiny little mention of her involvement in the eugenics movement. The organization that Margaret Sanger founded ended up becoming Planned Parenthood. And so this is just really inappropriate compared to what they said about George Washington. The next slide is giving an example of fascism. And so in the curriculum, it says fascists are very nationalist and racist, promoting their own race and expulsion or death of others. It is a far right conservative movement that appeals to upper and middle classes and promises to restore the old glory of their people. If you go and look at what Merriam-Webster says, the definition is very different. It's a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual and stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. So, there's obvious bias in that statement made by the curriculum. The next slide is on the election, and this was actually the last page of the curriculum, and I just found it kind of par for the course for what I found throughout the curriculum. But it mentions it ends with the 2016 election, and it talks about Hillary Clinton, but there is no mention at all of who won that election, which we know is Trump. And the very last statement was about climate change. So again, we want our children to have accurate history. I don't want a left bias or a right bias. I just want to know what happened. I want my children to have the whole perspective. This curriculum does not do that. It is shaping history through a lens of oppression, and it's really teaching children to hate capitalism and hate America. And that's very insulting to the American people whose tax dollars are funding public education. The next issue I was going to take you through is an elementary course that my son had, my youngest child. And this was something I found about a year and a half ago. And it was a lesson on communism versus capitalism. And that sounds, children need to learn the differences between the two, but it's all a matter of how it's presented. And in this situation, communism and capitalism were presented as equal systems. There were pros and cons to each, and the children were instructed to, at the end of this lesson, do a Punnett square exercise where they were putting in the pros and cons of each system. I really take issue with that because I don't think these are two comparable systems. Communism as a system has killed more people than any other system of government ever, or at least in the recent historical past, right? And that's not a disputed fact. That is true. But one of the things that it was teaching students about communism is that medical care is free, which is very misleading. It is not free. And when children think of free, that is not what this is. People paid dearly for that health care because they didn't have their freedoms, they couldn't choose. And also their money was going to the government to pay for that health care. So they're saying medical care is free, health conditions are good, and infant mortality rates are low. And again, there's no mention of the millions of people that have been killed because of communist regimes. And if you were trying to make this age appropriate for elementary, you could even just say millions of people that have been hurt by communism, and that would be more appropriate. And on the next slide, you can see with capitalism, there's no mention of innovation and entrepreneurship, which is something that the capitalist systems do so well. I mean, there's a lot of motivation to work hard and to be innovative and to take risks. And then you can have great success in a capitalistic society. And there's also a statement in here that capitalism creates a large gap between rich and poor. There's no mention of a strong middle class or the ability to improve your circumstances through hard work. And then at the very end, there's a statement that's made that most countries have abandoned laissez-faire capitalism. That's not totally untrue. But when they say next that many have implemented socialism, that's the lie. There are countries that have tried socialism and are no longer socialist. There are still countries that are socialist and communist today. But what does many mean to the kids? If I were to go and look on Google AI, which I did, what it said was that most countries on a list today, but that is not how this was presented in the material. And then the final curriculum I was going to mention today, Missy, is a curriculum that fortunately my own personal children did not have. I will have a child in this class this year, and I will be paying very close attention. But this teacher was an AP Human Geography course, which is typically where I live, sophomores, and in high school. And this was supplemental, meaning that it wasn't board-approved curriculum. There was board-approved curriculum, but what this teacher did was brought in another resource to help teach the students a lesson on genocide. And fortunately, a parent saw this. This teacher posted this on our learning management system, and a parent saw this and reported it. So that's how I found out about it. But the source that the teacher was using is something called the Democracy Labs, which is a very far left-leaning organization that has funding from George Soros. And if we go to the next slide, I've kind of blown up what was shown to the. It was 10 stages of genocide. And for each of those 10 stages, it gave either a Trump quote or a Trump example. And so we can see here that under classification, it said Mexicans are drug dealers, criminals, rapists, Trump. Under symbolization, it said immigrants are poisoning the blood of our people, Trump. Under dehumanization, political enemies are vermin, echoing Hitler, Trump. Under persecution, sweeping raids, giant camps, and mass deportations, Trump. This is not a lesson. This is propaganda. And then on the final slide I have here, these were the illustrations and the cartoons that were given with this lesson as well. So, it completely inappropriate, not the right way to teach genocide. And the teacher used this as an opportunity, I feel, to advance her activism.
Oh, there's no question on that. I think these cartoons are, I have a couple questions for you that I want to ask real quick before we go on to the next story. But I have to comment first. I have done some research and study. I forget where it was, in one of my college classes, I think, on just how impactful cartoons are in influencing people. And then I saw it again when I was researching actually for CSE back in May for our M4LU topic. And Judith Reisman does a ton of exploration into how cartoons were used in sexual education, essentially in pornography magazines, and how badly that just the fallout from it. So the point being, cartoons are very powerful, and people can think that, oh, they can't possibly mean that much, but it actually does have a huge impact on the way that people are influenced. So this is just insane to me that this is in the curriculums. I have to ask, how did you mentioned that you were able to get a hold of the copies. Real quick, before we go on to our next guest, how did you get the copies of these curriculums? Because I feel like most of the time, school doesn't even send curriculum home anymore.
Right. It is very difficult. I mean, you and I grew up with textbooks, and that was more straightforward. Those came home, parents were able to see those. Very few textbooks are used in the classroom today. Most things are online. In the first curriculum that I mentioned, the AP US History, while it wasn't a textbook, it was a printed document that was given to the students. Unfortunately, my daughter no longer had that document, but I was able to get one from a child that hadn't thrown it out yet. And so I was very fortunate to get that. In the second instance, I was cleaning out my son's papers out of his backpack, and that's how I came across the elementary curriculum. And I always go through when I pull things out, I do skim everything, and I'm very thankful that I caught that. In the last scenario, that particular supplemental curriculum with the cartoons, that was posted on the learning management system that our district uses. And a parent happened to catch it and shared it. And I'm very grateful.
You did mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that highlights the importance of just quite literally going through what your children are bringing home. Chances are they're going to just toss it because they don't care. Right. And they're not necessarily going to see the red flags that we do, because that's school. That's what they're learning. That's the experts, right?
That's right.
One final thing I want to just touch on, because you talk about the idea of not having a bias in the classroom, in history, and don't need the right side or the left side. Let's just hear what actually happened. Right. I want to highlight that, because I think that there is so often I forget what it's called, but it's like the chronological narrative or some lens there's a term for it, of how in today's culture, we look at history through our lens today of modern society and apply our current values to history. And the fact is, that's just not reality. That's not society wasn't the same. Cultures weren't the same. Beliefs weren't the same. Right. And it's completely unfair to try to apply our current values and what we believe to history. It's just, so I think that's such a great point that you made there. And I just wanted to highlight that. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that stuff was shocking. And I am excited now to move on to our next guest. We're going to bring Denise back in a little bit. Don't worry. We have a whole lot more to talk about. Our next guest is Shelley Flockhart. Shelley is a dedicated single mom of 4, passionately advocating for the American dream and parental rights in education. As vice chair of Dallas County Moms for Liberty in Iowa, I think that's kind of interesting. We've got someone from Houston in Texas and someone from Dallas in Iowa. She empowers parents to protect their children's futures amid challenging times. With over 5 years of political volunteering, she serves as a county election official and community volunteer, while also holding the role of civics director at her church. A small business owner and licensed cosmetologist, Shelley is on the recruiting and retention team for her local public school, where she champions transparency and American family values. She also enjoys CrossFit and gardening in her spare time, and recently has been advocating for a balanced, rigorous pro-America curriculum in K-12. Shelley inspires audiences and with her commitment to freedom, family, and opportunity for all. And I agree. I am inspired already. I am really excited to talk to you today, Shelley. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Missy. First, Denise, wow, your story, absolutely amazing, and great job for finding all of that. My story is somewhat similar. So my son is 16. I've got 4 kids. My oldest is 30. The next in line is 26. Next in line is 19, and then 16-year-old. And so I started seeing a definite change in school, everything. Let's just say school everything between the older 2 and the younger 2. And so this last year, my son was in English 2. And it was the very beginning of the year. So we have a app for your phone called Parent Square, which is what our school district uses. And that's how the teachers communicate with the parents. Coaches use the same thing. Excellent format. But in that, the English teacher sent messages stating what they were going to be going over in class. So we have been asking for transparency, and I think most of the parents in the district have been asking for the same thing. And what we found was there's been a change in English 2, and they had changed it over the course of about 6 years, taking out 2 books at a time, taking out the classic novels, replacing those with something new, something more fresh, something that the students would identify with. And so in that, there's 2 units that are supposed to be about the American dream that went into basically anti-America, divisive, pretty much the definition of CRT. And so as I started, I'm a regular mom. I am active in my community. I love to have fun, enjoy time with my kids, and I do hair. I'm behind the chair all the time. I'm not in front of a computer. I'm not like doing anything tech savvy. So, and you can ask Terry on that. So anyway, I started asking questions. It's basically asking questions. I always believe in remaining curious instead of judgmental right off the bat. So I asked to meet with the teacher. First, I was asking, can I get more information? And there were two books that were introduced right away. They were 2 graphic novels, and they're 6th grade reading level. And so,
and what grade were your son? Was it your son?
Yeah. Yes.
And what grade was he in at the time?
Sophomore year.
Oh my gosh. 6th grade.
6th, 7th grade reading level, graphic novels. And some of the pages you open up and there's no words, and so my first concern was, oh my gosh, can my son read? Like, can he read okay? So yeah. I actually ordered a different book, and I wanted to hear him read and make sure he could comprehend. I'm like, I'm pretty sure he can, because I've seen him read little things, but nothing in the last couple of years. So I had him do that, and he can read fine, thank goodness. But my concern was then for the other students. If we have students in the school who can't read at grade level, then we should be helping them. And so
I agree. Yeah, that's really important.
Yes. So I think we have some slides too to also show. Yeah, here's what they've changed to. The American Dream unit is the American Born Chinese, I Was Their American Dream, and those are 2 graphic novels. Then they go into This Is My America, which has a chapter entitled America with 3 Ks in it. The article, Why the American Dream is Unrecognizable Today. And most of the article is okay. It goes through some history and what people have thought the American Dream to be from when it started and now. But you get to the very end, and it goes into this whole part comparing China's dream to the American dream and saying we're similar. And I'm like,
wow,
what? Yeah. And then it goes into this whole thing about globalism. So they do a song that is called it's the American Dream song by MKTO, which is a very, I guess, sad song, basically stating the American dream isn't alive today. Then it goes into Steinbeck's A Paradox of Dreams, the poem The Hill We Climb, an excerpt from Becoming from Michelle Obama, the book Juneteenth, and they watched the movie Just Mercy, which is very similar to the book This Is My America. So very, very similar between Just Mercy and that one. So again, most of these are coming to the conclusion that the American dream is not for everyone. And that hit hard. It kind of went into the whole skin color thing and white supremacy, oppressor, the oppressed. And I started really thinking about the kids in the classroom. Where is the hope if one kid's sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, as I grow up, people are going to hold me back. And then there's the other kids in the classroom who could come to the conclusion of, I need to step back and let other people have my place in anything I do because it hasn't been fair. So it came down to identity for me. If kids are being, or, young adults are being told that their identity is one thing and that there's shame involved and other manipulating factors, this shouldn't be the decision of an educator. This should be the parents on what they're sharing with their student. So I'm like, why English 2? Where is this coming from? So we dug in and really researched, asked a lot of questions. And I also want to say, I do work with my school district. I'm not working against them. I'm not anti-public education. My son will be in the same school next year. It is a good school. We have some great teachers, and there's just a few who I think who have bought into some of these ideas and kind of ran with them. So in Iowa, we have a couple bills, House File 802 and Senate File 496, that specifically have been made in the last couple of years to make sure these things aren't being taught in the classroom. So why are they there? So
Yeah.
Bringing awareness and as I said, I have a hair salon. Clients will have sat in my chair off and on over the last 5 or 6 years and talked about concerns in school. They don't bring it up to the school because they have the fear that their student won't get treated the same, that they won't be able to play on sports teams as much, that they will be kind of flagged as, oh, hey, this parent's the disruptor. And it finally got to the point where I'm like, I have to say something. So if, we have ESAs, the student accounts where someone can go to a different school. And if we're seeing some parents pull their, their next in line students out of our school to go somewhere else, maybe we need to look at the reasons why and solve those. So that is my heart, is to make the school district better. But in that, it has also involved digging in and doing the hard things. And I have zero regrets for that. As I said, I'm a cosmetologist and not super tech savvy or anything. But as we have gone along, thank goodness for Moms for Liberty. So, and the people around me. So finding the resources and finding out how to approach different things has been a journey and awesome.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you were able to connect into Moms for Liberty to be able to fight back. I want to ask you a quick question, because I'm kind of, I feel almost flummoxed, frankly. Like, why is this even being brought up in English? What is the purpose of having this kind of a book or these books in English? What are they? Why? What is the goal here?
So from, that's questions that I asked as well. And the answers that I keep getting is we want to make sure that the students can identify with the stories that they're reading. That's it.
So wow. So I thought that the whole concept of English, right? The purpose of English as a class is we're learning, first, we are learning cultural, iconic books and classics. That's the ways that we can connect. But we talk about, I guess I don't remember it just being this activist type of lesson. You learned about the storyline and how character development happened, and maybe how characters were portraying things that were happening in society and why that could have played into the development of the story. But I just don't remember English class being something that is trying to train little activists. And I think this highlights how we have seen such a shift in the purpose of curriculum nowadays.
Yes, I would agree. And I don't have the full answer on that yet. Is it that the students weren't reading the classic novels? Even my my 3 older kids did, and they can tell you all about the classic novels. So why?
Wow.
And they felt like they were good books. So why the change now? I would agree. And as we dug into some of the English material, there are some activist groups in English teaching. And again, not by all means, not all English teachers. However, even just the book, Just Mercy, or the film, Just Mercy, the book that pertains to that one, the writer is an activist. If you go in and research her bio, that is exactly what she is writing for.
Yeah.
So yeah. Why now if we're not trying to do something divisive? I also, and we'll get back to some of the slides, I also had contacted the school and said, hey, what about some other materials? Yeah, here we go. What about some other materials that show the opposite side? Like, what about stories of the American dream where someone from, I don't care what race, but that they came to America, they assimilated, and that they conquered it and have this beautiful life because of the American dream. There are so many of those stories out there, and I asked for that, and those weren't added. So here, this shows just the Lexile level. So one of the things that I did get from the school right off the bat was the books, and this was actually just for me, so my scribbling on there, but it was the Lexile level and what's normal, and then what was being given with these materials. Again, that was a concern for me. And when it came to, we had a reconsideration of materials process, and the committee was basically told that these are appropriate by the curriculum director. So that's kind of what we got out of that. But I would recommend every teacher or every parent, when it comes to what they're reading in their classrooms, is finding out what is the Lexile level for that book. We can go on to the next.
I'm curious about that. I want to come back to that when we get to the Q&A of what exactly that means and how parents can be aware of that and find that out. But anyway, yes, please continue, because I find this fascinating.
So here's out of the first 2 books. So I was there, American Dream, and this is American Born Chinese as well. And if you look at the picture on the right, the microaggressions bingo, and it has all kinds of basically slurs. So if a student wasn't aware of the slurs before, now they are. And there were several different things in that. As you can read, even, the middle picture at the bottom, it was, constantly just like picking apart America or Americans and the assumptions of, there's even one part in there, that wouldn't be that concerning, but it kept talking about how Americans, and this is the girl's opinion, but Americans just are concerned about their house and their clothes and their car and money. And it was just such a shallow view of Americans.
Wow.
It broke my heart. I'm like, actually, no, that's not it. I mean, just that shallow view. And we can go to the next one. This is My America. So this one was the one written by the activist. And then that chapter with the K's in there, in the middle of our country's name. Wow. You can't tell me that that was not on purpose.
Clearly.
Mm-hmm. And several cuss words, inappropriate. Okay, this is the one on the left here is from communication that's through the Parent app. So this is where I want to make sure people understand, read the entire thing. So for me in the salon, in between clients or when I'm done at the end of the day, I would read these messages. So I would be aware as to what was going on. If there's any links, make sure that you click on the link to see what else there is. But yeah, a small excerpt from Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And I asked 3 times for the excerpt and I never got it. The picture on the right was, so what I had done, when they offered the two graphic novels, I asked for something else. I'm like, is there a possibility of doing something else? So my son read Of Mice and Men, and the teacher made me aware that they were going to have discussions and things on the other 2 pieces of material that he would have to have one-on-one with the teacher to talk about what was in his book. And so he wasn't going to be a part of the classroom discussions on the first 2. Well, one day he comes home with this worksheet that they were given, all folded up tiny so that he could sneak it out of the classroom because nothing's coming home. The books don't come home. The assignments don't come home. It's all done in the classroom. And it's very hard to get access to some of that. But anyway, he brings this worksheet home and it's the commentary ladder. And if you read on it, actually, I think I have one over here. If you read on it, just read that last sentence. Everyone in my town was brown, and I couldn't help but think that being white made you extra special. And then they go through the commentary ladder to come up with their thesis statement. And he wrote the answers that they were saying in class. And that's when I pulled him out of the class. I was like, no, this is not what we teach at my house. You know, whether it's an author's opinion or her example of what was going on, this is not what we teach. And I felt like this is compelled speech.
Yeah.
Whether he says it out loud or not, it's every time you write with a pen or a pencil, it becomes a little part of you, right? It's just how it works. And so,
well, I'm surprised too, though, because you said he wasn't going to be a part of the class of those conversations. Right. I mean, it's beneficial that for you and for us that we're able to see it because he was able to bring this home. But how did that even happen? Because if he was not supposed to be a part of those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I don't know, but I did ask on that. So when I talked to the principal said, yeah, I asked her about it. And she said, oh, they weren't supposed to take that home.
Oh, trying to hide anything, eh? No, nothing to see here. Just move along, along. Wow.
Yes. Like, kind of like, shoot.
That's incredible.
So these were from the slides. So before I'd pulled them from class, I was asking for the material. I asked several times to go on and meet with her. So the first time that I asked, it was directed back to the principal. And then they let me know that the proper procedure would be that I would meet with the teacher and the principal, that's just how they do it now. So then scheduling became difficult to, work with the salon schedule, the teacher schedule, and the principal's schedule. So I was in waiting of trying to coordinate that. In that meantime, I did ask for more of the material. Can you please send me more on what they're going to be going over in class? So she sent me the link to some of the slides that she uses in class. So as I started reading through, it's like a whole bunch of slides, maybe 100 different slides, but pretty fast to go through. But here they are going through, what does the American dream mean? Create a definition for the American dream. This should be your own idea of what you think it means. Do not look the definition up yet. And then they go into, but what does the American dream actually mean? The ideal by which equality of opportunity is available to any American, allowing the highest, and I can't read what that says, whatever achieved. Okay, well, so equal opportunity, right? But then they start going, and we can go to the next slide. As they go on and it progresses and going into the articles, the poems, there were 2 poems by Tupac that were in there too. Concrete rose, how it's impossible for a rose to grow out of concrete, but you can push through, that kind of a thing. Again, the oppression, the being held down, the system is broken. And so they go into the American Dream song, and the words are here. So again, on a slide, they're having conversations over all of these as they're going through, the books that, yeah. So the American Dream's starting to look really bleak, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, if I were a student in that class, maybe it's not for me. Or if I do accomplish the American Dream, am I holding someone else back? Some of the thoughts, some of the identity parts. We can go on to the next one. Quote, I was their American dream. I was too Filipino to be white and too white to be Filipino, too Egyptian to be anything. So where did I fit in? And again, why are we focusing on these quotes? If it's not about color and race, what is happening here? So again, asking questions. As we moved forward in a lot of it, the administration, except for the curriculum director, but the administration and the school board have not read the slides, have not accessed them, have not read the books.
Wow.
So
that's absolutely crazy to me. That seems insane. And now we're about ready to jump into the live Q&A, or the remainder of the Q&A, actually, where we're going to start talking about the action. So let's bring Denise back on with us and talk a little bit about, first of all, I want to say first, thank you again for sharing, both of you, for sharing this incredible information and helping everyone to see that this is reality, that it's insidious, it is sneaky. And it's not everyone, it's not every teacher, it's not every school district. That's something I want to be very, very clear on. I know that's what neither of you are trying to say, that we definitely are not trying to say that at all. But it does exist out there, and it's really important to stay aware. So now that we've looked at what some of the examples are, let's talk about what you did, what action you took. And we've heard a little bit from Shelley on reaching out to the teacher. Denise, a little bit from you as well. Denise, let's start with you. What action did you take once you realized what the issue was, what the problems were? What action did you take to start fighting back?
So in the case of AP US history, I took a number of steps. The first thing that I did was I submitted a public information request. So I made sure I had all of the information available. I wanted to know who wrote this curriculum, who approved it, how long it had been in use, things like that. And the response that I got back from the district was, we have no responsive data. And to this day, I don't know, if that was completely accurate or if they really just didn't know. And so that is why I call that AP US history curriculum rogue. What I do know is that our school district had a board approved AP US history that was in use by the comparable high school in our district. From a socioeconomic standpoint, there's another high school that's very similar, and they were using the board approved textbook for AP US history. The next thing that I asked for was the AP US history test scores for our high school compared to all the high schools in our district. I mainly was interested in our high school compared to the comparable socioeconomic high school. And what I found was pretty shocking in that our high school's rogue curriculum was not only a terrible curriculum, but it wasn't preparing students for the AP US history test that students can take at the end of the year for college credit. And for viewers that don't know how that works, a student can score anything from, I think, a 1 to a 5. And if you get a 3 or higher on that exam, there's a very good chance that you'll be receiving college credit for that class. What I found was that at our high school, we were below the mean score for students on that test was below the state average. And so I have it here on the slide. Our high school score was 2.3. The state average was 2.28. The comparable high school actually had a mean higher average, which you would expect the same outcome at our high school. There's no reason for it to be different. So that was really troubling. And then there were a lot of students, I don't have the exact data points on this, but I can say from experience, there are a lot of students that had an A in the class that received like a 2 on the AP US history exam. If you receive an A in the class, you really ought to be doing better. And it says that you know the material. So clearly this material was not preparing the students. So the next step that I took was I listed out all of my concerns just methodically. And again, I'm not a historian, I'm just a mom, but I feel like it's really important to say that anybody can pick out bias or inconsistencies and even find inaccurate information in something once you read it, right? So I just listed out all of my concerns and I sent that email off to our principal. We have a wonderful school principal. He and I sat down, we reviewed all of those concerns, and then he took all of that to the district for me and I challenged the curriculum. And ultimately, the best part of the story is that after a semester of reviewing my concerns, the district did decide to remove that rogue curriculum and implement the board-approved textbook. And so now students have a much different class in AP US history at our high school, and I'm very thankful for that. In the case of the elementary curriculum that I mentioned, I met with the principal and we sat down and talked about my concerns again, and they are making changes to that small curriculum, which I'm very glad about. Because the other thing with that is those are young children. I mean, it's terrible to do this to high school students, but when you have very, very young children, they're extremely impressionable. And these seeds are being planted in our kids at a very young age. And I want to make sure parents hear me with that. We can't assume that just because a student's in elementary school that they're not receiving the same indoctrination, just at a different level, because they are. And then with the third curriculum that I mentioned, the genocide lesson, thankfully, I didn't have a child in that class, but thankfully the parent said something, and it was removed within about a week of her challenging that.
That's great. I have to support what you said too, by the way, just from my own personal experience on AP US history. First of all, having taken AP US history as a student in high school and understanding the rigors of, or remembering it to be quite rigorous and in order to be able to pass the test. And all three of my children actually, I believe, took AP US history. And by my final one, my youngest, who actually just graduated high school this year, she said that at that point, they just stopped taking the test. Like they weren't even in, and I was so floored that this was happening because I don't know, I guess kids were so stressed out by the test. I have a feeling it probably is a bit more because of curriculum that isn't supporting them, because I saw that as well, which we talked about with Daniel Buck a bit, the idea of grade inflation, something, well, in this case, they just were getting graded on something that wasn't even accurate, but seeing grade inflation where you're getting a good grade. So you think as a parent, everything, or your child is getting a good grade, it seems like everything should be okay. But then you have a very clear outcome indicating that this grade is not accurately representing the knowledge that they have that is required for the course.
Right.
So well, congratulations on such great results. That's really encouraging. Shelley, unfortunately, I think has a little bit of a different story with what the turnout was, but please let's share your timeline on what action steps you took and what happened.
Okay. Yeah. unfortunately, mine's not as good of a story in the end, but we aren't done yet, actually. So it started September 10th of last year. And, of course, always go to the teacher first. That's what I want to make sure that parents understand is don't just jump the gun. Go to the educator first and ask them about it, and go with curiosity, not judgment. Ask the questions that you need to. And then if it escalates, go on to the principal. I went to the principal next. And then as that proceeded and he didn't see a need to go any further, then I went on to the superintendent. And during hours, one of the confusing parts was if it's a violation of two different bills that we have in Iowa, do we still go through this reconsideration of materials process that we were going through? And let me back up. That started after going to the superintendent. He actually had me at the very beginning do a review, do my own review and write it out for him of every single bit of material. And that took an entire weekend, but I got to know the material even more. I ordered the books on my own. You could probably just go to your local library and find them, but and then we went forward with that. I was told to go by the school, or the school board had me go back to the school level and administration. And so I went back to the administration and proceeded to go through a reconsideration of materials process. And that is where you're going in front of a committee that is looking at the material and either approving or suggesting something else, or just plain denying it. So nowhere in there was I ever trying to get rid of a book out of our school. I felt like there were better options we could use, especially for an entire class curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. So it went forward, went through that process. Then it went to the school board. Then it went on to, I appealed to the Department of Education. So went in front of basically a law judge. And then the process was all about whether the process was being followed correctly by the school board, who, when we went to the school board and appealed to them, they only wanted to talk about the process, not about the actual material. So it became kind of this whole circus type thing. But I was like, I would go to bed at night and I would, okay, God, if I'm just supposed to be, if we're supposed to stop here, let's stop here. And wow. If you want me to continue, just give me a fresh idea. And I would wake up the next morning and it would be like, here's the next thing. And wow. So, yeah, kind of crazy. And, but we moved forward, continued to talk about the material. So every time that it was like, let's get off track and talk about process, let's get off track and only talk about these two books and not everything else that's being added in with it, we continued to talk about the actual material. So the next part is in September, which will be going before the Iowa Board of Education and talking about the whole thing with them. I expect the exact same results, but I'm hopeful for something different, and I'm hopeful for answers. This will it'll also give our legislature an idea on what else needs to be fixed with some of those bills. So even if it doesn't go anywhere and a parent feels like this is impossible, there's still more steps that that we can take and continue to move forward.
So that is I have a follow-up question to that, because you followed the process, right? Daniel Buck talks about this. You both followed the process, which was great. And he even includes the importance, or recommends understanding the laws in your state, what the processes and policies are, so that you're following it the right way to try to speed things along. But you mentioned this reconsideration of materials, which then when we were talking earlier, you said that the school board never even actually looked at the curriculum. So this really highlighted a gap in the policy and the process for fighting if a parent has a challenge to curriculum or anything else, and challenging these violations, there's an issue or there's a gap there. So what is, and Denise, you might have some thoughts on this as well. What do we do then? It sounds like we're not done. You said you're still going further, so that's good. But what can we do to fight back?
Well, in that, so we had the hearing basically, and it was 3 hours, 15 minutes. I ended up representing myself in that hearing. And toward the end of the hearing, when the school board president was speaking, I asked a question of who is in charge of the final approval. And that question wasn't answered clearly. And so making sure that our school board members understand the role that they have. Here in Iowa, we have Iowa School Board Association, who puts out recommendations and suggestions, and some other organizations that put out recommendations and suggestions for school boards. But do they ever really know how much actual authority they have is a good question. So sometimes I feel like it's educating the school board members. Hey, here's the deal. Even if there's a committee, or if there is even a committee within the school, that these are the people that approve the materials because we don't have time to do all of that or whatever, they still have a final say. So just making sure that they are aware.
Making sure that the school board knows what power they actually have. That's important.
Yes.
Denise, do you have any other thoughts?
Well, Shelley's story is incredible, and I'm so grateful for her and her courage to pursue this. I think what's really interesting about both of our stories is that we both live in quote unquote conservative or red areas. I'm in Texas, which is a very conservative state. I am in a very blue county, but I'm in a kind of a red part of that county. And I think, what's concerning is that if it's happening here and if it's happening to Shelley there, it's happening everywhere. This is something that we all need to be paying attention to. And you made the point, Missy, we all need to understand the laws in our states. In the state of Texas, for example, parents have the right to view all curriculum. Now, there is kind of a loophole with supplemental curriculum. So like that last curriculum that I talked about with genocide, that is considered supplemental. It's just an extra resource that a teacher brought into the lesson. And teachers have the freedom to do that. Thankfully, she decided to post that. And so a parent saw it. But as far as board approved curriculum, though, we have a right to see that in the state of Texas. And I encourage parents to always pay attention to the curriculum, no matter what it is. Science, too, even math. There can be kind of woke propaganda, indoctrination in all subjects today. We really have to pay attention.
Yeah, I agree. It's really sad that even in math, but we have seen that. I remember when it was all over the news, they were saying that math is racist, and right. Oh my golly. Definitely check out Daniel Buck's conversation. He had some really interesting examples of each of the different subjects and how that works. But it is important. You highlight something there, and I think it was when we were talking about this part of the show that you mentioned the importance of knowing just reiterating the importance of knowing your state's policies and laws, because they could be breaking the law and you don't even realize it because, for example, you are supposed to be able to have access to the curriculum or whatever it is. Right. And they give you the runaround. And the reality is that you do have access, or you should have that. You would be supported. So knowing what your rights are is very, very important.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I know we're going a little long, but I wanted to move on to one of my two remaining questions. One of the biggest ones is, while you're going through all of this, and this is for both of you, obviously, this is a challenging thing to do. This can be very hard. It can be overwhelming. It can feel scary because we invariably get pushback when you try to fight the status quo and fight the woke monster. Frankly, there is always someone who wants to come after us. So what support and resources did you reach out to? What helped? What advice do you have to others who might be afraid of doing something, and so that they know there is support out there?
You want to go, Shelley?
You can go. I was going to say, you can go first. that one.
Well, I think this is where Moms for Liberty comes in. I am very fortunate to have a strong community of supporters, like-minded individuals, parents, just common sense everyday Americans that are tired of seeing this happen to our children. And so when I have found issues, I have had tremendous support. I guess, I just feel compelled and called to speak up. And I know not everybody does feel that way. And we all have different roles too. Some of us are called to speak publicly and some of us want to stay more behind the scenes. But I always encourage people, there's always something that we can do, and many ripples make a big wave. And so if we can all figure out what our role is in something, we can help save our country. And that's really what I feel like we are trying to do. But so I just encourage parents, look for a Moms for Liberty chapter near you. And if you don't have one, maybe consider starting one. And there's so many people behind the scenes that would be rooting for you and trying to help you get one established. And there's lots of other good parent groups that are out there too. But of course, I think Moms for Liberty is a great place to find support.
Love it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So at the very beginning of becoming involved with Moms for Liberty, I just remember the relief of thinking, oh my gosh, it's not just me.
Yeah.
I was feeling like my dad was born in 1910. Mm-hmm. So this sounds absolutely crazy, but he was 62 when I was born, and he was a retired principal and educator, and very old school. We'll just put it that way. And so when some of these things, I started seeing some of these things, he's been passed away for years now, but seeing some of these things come in the school, I was like, my dad was right. And some of the things where he's like, this will be next. I thought, no way, that's absolutely crazy. I was probably a lot more, I would say, liberal leaning in my 20s, and just seeing things shift. But as I started experiencing this with my own children, reaching out to some friends, and then also understanding that this was going on all over the place was, sad, but yet a relief. I wasn't the only one going through that. And then the resources that Moms for Liberty has had, whether it's been training or a book that came out or podcasts or anything like that, has helped tremendously. Even just the support from our legislators too. Our governor, thank goodness we've got a pretty conservative governor. Knowing that you have people who are on your side, and remembering, like, when things get hard, you're just exposing what's there. And one of the things I found is, as that was starting to amp up and things were getting hard and people started getting, a little bit mean on social media, the people who came into the salon and were very, very supportive, a lot of them were teachers. And this part almost makes me cry. It was the reverse of what I was being told was going to happen is what actually happened. And so when some of the opposition had posted some stuff to try to cancel the salon, or me as a stylist, my business actually increased 20% last year. So again, the opposite happens. And people are able to have conversations. It's, going back to the divisive concepts in the schools. When everything's filtered to one side, people only think they can talk about that one side, right? Well, if you create a space where you can talk about whatever side and have those conversations in a non-hostile, safe way, then it becomes pretty beautiful. And so I just want to encourage people to, if we can't talk about things, we're not free.
Yeah.
So just reminding people of that part.
Well, you have clearly done both of you have done just some incredible things. And so now as we wrap up, my final question is, what is kind of, as you're reflecting on this, and maybe if you have any advice or final takeaways that we might not have gotten to cover, or what is the one biggest thing that stands out to you and some advice that you would give?
Well, and I created a slide, I think, that kind of highlights what I feel like is important, but don't assume that lessons are neutral or benign. Always read the curriculum and assess. And that's really hard. I mean, I'm a mom of 4. Shelly's a mom of 4. We lead busy lives. But when you come across something, don't just assume it could be about America. It could sound like a nice title about the American dream. And I think that was used in your example, I believe, Shelly, right? The American dream being taught to your kids. And then speak up, be courageous, and take action. Again, maybe we aren't all called to come out and speak publicly, but can you send an email? Can you set up a meeting? Do something. Don't just let it go. I mean, there's something that we have to do to stop this. We can't just let it all happen and assume it'll just go away. It's not going away. We have to speak up. And remember, just being a parent is fine. That's all you need to be, or just an individual, just a citizen. You don't have to be an expert. I think there's been so much drilled into us. Well, ask the experts the last few years, right? No, anyone can tell if something is not right. So challenge that. And then finally, using facts over feelings. If you encounter something that's upsetting, and I think both Shelly and I have been very upset by what we found. I mean, I was really incensed when I found out what my oldest daughter had learned. But I had to keep my emotions in check and just calmly present the facts, logic, and reasoning, common sense of the case. So that is my advice.
I love it. That's so good and actionable too. I like that you have some clear outlines. Shelly, any tips, any last final takeaways, reflections, or anything you'd like to share that we maybe didn't get to talk about?
So yes. Yeah. I would just like to say that reaching out to your fellow Moms for Liberty is incredibly helpful. Terry Patrick, and we can show my very last slide there. She had done there we go. She had done this slide for me, and it shows kind of everything that we went through. And we can go back to just regular, but different people on your team are good at different things. I am not the tech person. I am not the person who can bring all those things together. So making sure that I understand that it's going to take other people, and involving the people who are in your community or who are reaching out to you. If it's another parent reaching out to you and saying, hey, I have concerns, meet face to face. Face to face is always, to me, it's always better. Getting those in-person contacts. And remember to laugh. So one quick thing. So probably maybe my worst moment when people had gotten really mean on social media, I had my first colonoscopy. And this is a funny story. Had my first colonoscopy, and of course they give you medicine so that you're like all loopy and everything. And I get home, I take a nap, I wake up from my nap, and I've got like 40 text messages. Are you okay? I can't believe what's happening online and all of this. And I'm like, and then I pull up like what's going on, and I was like, well, that's kind of mean. Because I was all loopy still. And I was just like, oh my gosh, how hilarious is that? That like, again, protection. But it's just people being mean, continue to move forward, and never assume that the whole school district is thinking a certain way, or the administration all thinks a different way. I really stick to the idea that I am working with my district to try to make it better. I'm not working against them. This is not a me against them. This is us wanting what's better for the future of America. When it came to the American dream and seeing the negativity about that whole part, and then going into this year where we're celebrating 250 years, we need the kids to be excited about this. So I am hopeful that a lot more is going to come out with that, and kids are going to have the assignments that they should, will encourage them for the future, that we can like have kids coming out of school doing amazing things no matter what school. So whether someone's in public school, private school, homeschooling, just really encouraging them to continue to do their next right thing. So
Awesome. Well, we've got some important points made there, some clear action items, which we will have linked into the chat. We'll have those slides available on M4Lacademy.org on our website under the monthly resources. But also just a simple reminder to be able to laugh. I think that is so important. Actually, that's such a positive, genuine takeaway, because there's a bunch of trolls out there. And quite frankly, a lot of them I think are probably just bots at this point. So being able to just let it roll off your back. And I think you had said previously when we were talking to you, like, not even to turn off Facebook or get off of social media, take a breather. Don't always be looking at everything, because there's just people who, they don't know you. They don't, if they actually had a conversation with you, they probably would get along great, frankly.
Right.
In real life, but it's this, keyboard warrior mentality that comes out. Well, thank you, ladies, both so much for joining and sharing your story and such encouraging tips and direction. And wow, I just have to say that was incredible. I think that so many times there's parents who think, like I said earlier, when we opened, we think it's not happening here, but the reality is it is everywhere. As they both shared, both women came from what would be considered conservative red states or districts, and yet it is happening even there. That's why it's so important for us to get involved. Go through your kids' backpack, ask them questions. Just like Daniel Buck was saying yesterday, talk to them, look at the lessons, look in the portals and the programs that are used for communicating from your schools. All right, so we know that this information, these topics that we discussed, can feel really shocking and even overwhelming. I mean, you probably might be listening to this and think, oh my goodness, does this mean that I have to go to court? Not necessarily. If you have an issue, not necessarily, but no matter what, if this is the thing that really gets you going and you're fired up and want to know what to do next, remember, just like they both said, you are not alone in this fight. So I'd like to encourage you to, again, check out our monthly resource library at M4Lacademy.org. It'll have everything you need to get educated on the topic. We equip you with tools and help you get engaged. The most important thing, of course, join as a Moms for Liberty member, and you're going to have a great community that is here to support you and help you in this fight, a community full of truly joyful warriors that are going to be there and have your back. Stay tuned. We have a lot of amazing topics coming up in this fall. Again, this is our Back to School series where we're talking about knowing your rights. We've just covered curriculum, red flags. We're going to look at school safety, both online and in-person considerations. And then we're going to wrap up the month with an amazing engaged parent panel where we are going to bring in parents that are from both sides, really, where you have stay at home or whether you're a working parent. What does it look like to be engaged? How do you balance all of it? So really excited to be talking to some incredible people. Then later on in the fall, you do not want to miss some of the topics that we're going to be covering in September. We're going to be doing MAHA in schools. So we're going to talk about food and pharma in the schools. That's going to look like school lunches, school vaccination requirements. We've got some really great speakers coming in, so you definitely want to tune in for that. In October, we take a turn into technology, and we will be looking at ed tech and data collection. And by golly, if you think that the schools do not have very much data on you or your kids, then I just beg that you tune in for some of these conversations, because it is really important to be aware of what type of data is being collected and what your rights are around protecting that data for you and your kids. And then we'll be moving into social media, video gaming, and how that impacts mental health. So that's just a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. We have so many incredible speakers, so many great resources that we will be covering. We really look forward to seeing you again in the future. And thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.